Much like the name implies, Rayman Origins shares a lot of things in common with the PS1 original, and in all honesty, it's a game I never thought would get made. Given the popularity of Rayman 2 and his successful transition to 3D, it makes sense that a new mainline game would try to capitalise on that, but as someone who prefers the 2D original, you better believe I was hyped for this when it was announced. So given that I've recently looked at the humble beginnings of the series with Rayman 1, it only felt fitting to look at the other end of the spectrum and see where Rayman's latest outings have taken him. Given that his latest adventure was 10 years ago and his creator Michel Ancel has retired from the gaming industry, I guess his outings have taken him to the platforming mascot equivalent of a glue factory. But let's not dwell on the thought that the Rabbids are still going strong and rubbing shoulders with gaming royalty, and definitely don't think about how Rayman has been relegated to a cameo in a game which was built off of his own franchise. No, don't think about that at all. I mean, if we haven't had a game in that long, it must be for good reason, right? The last couple of attempts must have been little more than bland cookie-cutter platformers which fans only remember fondly because they look nice. Well, in true YouTuber fashion, I intend to be the authority on what everyone else thinks as I definitively answer the question of whether Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends are actually any good. So Rayman Origins begins one sunny afternoon with Rayman, Glowbox and a couple of teensies as they laze around the Glade of Dreams. While eating, sleeping and generally having the work ethic of your average penny black barman, the noise they produce manages to tick off their neighbours in the land of the living dead. An invasion ensues, the Electoons are once again captured, and the Glade of Dreams will fall apart if they can't be rescued and used to heal the resident god known as the Bubble Blower. As a side note, the Bubble Blower turns out to be Polycus from Rayman 2. It has absolutely no bearing on the plot, but now you know. Anyway, after various video game shenanigans, you find yourself in the epicenter of a thunderstorm on a steampunk-esque floating city of metal. Eventually, you'll make your way to the heart of the city where the magician from Rayman 1 is located and is found to have built and rules over the floating fortress. It's here we find that the magician has become quite the fan of Mr. Dark, and, using a microphone disguised as a flower, had orchestrated the quarrel with the living dead. This was supposedly to distract from his true motive to use the city and an army of robots to overthrow Polycus. The magician is defeated as the city explodes, throwing Rayman and friends back down to Earth where they land in the same position they occupied at the start of the game. Credits roll. The story is every bit as wacky as the visuals portray it to be. Though I personally prefer the darker approach that Rayman 2 took to its storytelling, there's no denying the zanier tone of Origins fits perfectly with the art style. But if you've played the game yourself, you might find some of those details are a bit hazy, and by hazy, I mean aren't actually in the game at all. Yeah, so the story doesn't make much sense. One minute the living dead are the enemies, the next a magician has turned evil and has a robot army, and it's all loosely stapled together with little to no explanation. The extra bits I've added in come from an unreleased script which fleshes out the magician's motives, giving him a backstory, even a name. Now, much like Rayman 1, I'm not going to criticise the game for its plot as it's really not important here, but it is still a little disappointing that there was a much better storyline that never saw the light of day. So after spending over a decade in the 3D realm, the gameplay sees Rayman return back to his 2D roots. Simply get to the end of the level while collecting any caged Electoons you find along the way. This time round though, the 6 cages in each level are required from completing different objectives. You'll get 1 just for finishing the level, 2 hidden off screen somewhere, 2 for collecting a set amount of lums, and 1 for beating the level as quickly as possible. You can also earn trophies and ribbons for beating the level extra fast or collecting nearly all the lums in the stage respectively, but thankfully they're more for bragging rights than anything else as they can be a real bitch to finish. As well as unlocking skins, cages serve as your currency for progression, with a certain amount being required to unlock each new world and finish the game. It's a system that works well, mostly because you don't have to collect every single one this time around, but also because it lets the player skip the bulk of cages in a particularly troublesome level. Yes, though Origins significantly tones down the bullshit over its predecessor, it'll still give you a decent challenge. The health system is gone, meaning you'll die the second anything touches you, checkpoints are sparse, and the combination of collecting lums and hunting for secrets will keep you on your toes. But by far the most difficult sections of the game require you to chase a poor defenseless chest through a gauntlet of crumbling platforms without slowing down. No checkpoints and precise platforming will have you dying repeatedly as you learn the patterns, while the creative level design on display here makes it feel like a major set piece is unravelling around you. These are genuinely my favourite parts of the game. It could have been so easy to mess this up, but by keeping them short and removing the life system, every death inches you closer to success, and completing one of these is beyond satisfying. Naturally, their added difficulty means that these levels are completely optional, and so will instead reward you with one of 10 skull teeth. These are used to unlock the final, extremely optional, extremely difficult level of the game, the Land of the Livid Dead. From the get-go, patches of carnivorous roses make up vast areas of the ground. Coffins fly through the sky as you desperately wall jump between them, while lava engulfs the screen. I got a feel for the level from the very first moment when I attempted to speak to a handbag-wielding granny who promptly laid me out. This level is basically an extended version of the chest levels, and boy will it test your knowledge of the game mechanics. Challenging but fun, and it felt like a perfect close to the game. But like I said before, these levels are optional and feel more like over-the-top set pieces, whereas the majority of levels consist of small platforms, bottomless pits, spikes and static enemies. It's a standard platforming fare, and on paper that really isn't all that special, but the spark that brings these environments to life lies in the controls. The controls of Origins are very reminiscent of the originals, albeit with a modern twist. All of Rayman's staple abilities return, but this time around there's a stronger emphasis on parkour elements. This is a Ubisoft game after all, it wouldn't be right not to have some nod to Assassin's Creed somewhere. In all seriousness, the control scheme is downright fantastic. Rayman feels snappy as he bounces back and forth between walls, his jumps have a nice weight and arc to them, and he carries his momentum well. The genius of these controls come from their simplicity. Outside of holding down a button to sprint, your only options are to jump and attack, but it isn't limiting in the slightest. He can ground pound, slide, grab ledges and swing from vines, and it feels incredibly fluid chaining these elements together. Along with that, attacking while running gives you a burst of speed, where jumping immediately afterwards can carry that momentum forward. The game is full of tech like this, and it makes each level feel like a jungle gym of creativity. It's a solid blend of great controls working alongside the level design, making it easy to pick up and play, but difficult to master. Throughout the course of the game, you'll also unlock new powers at the start of each world. I see the logic with the setup, but I don't think it pays off, as the powers aren't all that interesting. Punching, swimming and hovering are the basics you'd expect from Rayman, so they don't feel all that rewarding to unlock, while the ability to shrink in size when running through specific gaps doesn't alter the gameplay enough to be fun to use. If it worked more like the mini mushroom from New Super Mario Bros, I think you'd get a lot more out of this just from being able to run on water. The final ability is easily the best one, letting Rayman run up curved walls with enough speed and jumping to a parallel wall to keep going. It feels like a natural extension to the new parkour feel Rayman's controls sport, and it helps to distinguish Origins gameplay from other 2D platformers. True, the controls are definitely second to none, but this far into the video it can't have escaped your attention just how gorgeous these visuals are. The art style is truly timeless, feeling like a cartoon has come to life, with each character being filled to the brim with crisp animation and personality. Bold, stark outlines make every detail pop, while the backdrops radiate rich colours that manage to impress to this day. It's at this point I'd like to remind you that this game came out in 2011 on the 7th gen consoles. It really shows off what the then newly developed UbiArt framework engine was capable of, and it managed to look this good while running at 60 FPS. Just to reiterate, this was an Xbox 360 game. However, this is where things might get a bit controversial. As gorgeous as this game looks, I feel that it never quite reaches its full potential. The aesthetics of the world are missing that smorgasbord of colour found in Rayman 1, and given that a lot of the level themes pay homage to that game, it makes it all the more noticeable. Comparing the gibberish jungle from Origins to the Dream Forest from 1 is night and day, and the colours on display in the latter just make the scene look more interesting despite the graphical shortcomings. It's not that the visuals are bad by any stretch of the imagination, that much is clear. It's more that the environments don't feel as magical and whimsical as they could. Growing the occasional lone pink flower into a predominantly green backdrop isn't as stark as having an entire section of the jungle awash with dazzling pinks and purples, and that's just a damn shame. I think I became aware of my feelings towards the visuals around the halfway mark of the game. After unlocking all your abilities, your new objective is to travel back through each world and rescue a king to help forge a path to the final area. It's at this point that I think a change in level theming was needed to keep things looking fresh. You've seen everything the game has to offer, so it just ends up feeling like more of the same. That's true for the level design as well. More spikes and pitfalls, more static enemies, more collecting lums and cages. You might be saying to yourself, that's how games work, that's a core gameplay loop, and you are absolutely right. But by this point in Origins, all the interesting mechanics have already been shown. You've already acquainted yourself with a fleshed out moveset, you've even ridden a giant mosquito through the skies multiple times. But where the game could shift gears, let you take what you've learnt and run with it, you're never allowed to further explore what Rayman can do, and that can feel somewhat limiting at times. The game gives you so much control over Rayman's momentum that it feels like it's begging you to go faster, but as the level structuring increases in complexity, it more often funnels you into traps that cap your speed. This half of the game could have flown so much better if they simply utilised the unlockable powers more by introducing brand new mechanics based around chaining them together, but that never really comes to fruition. I don't want to end this section of the review on a sour note, and I'll go into my generalised thoughts of Rayman Origins at the end of the video, but what I will say is that Origins is still a game I love a lot, and that's in no small part due to its incredible controls, gorgeous art style, and its unique spin on the platforming genre. I try to be as unbiased as anyone can be when reviewing something they're passionate about, but I'm unfortunately cursed with hindsight, so as great as Origins is, I know what comes next. The plot of Legends sees Rayman and friends sleeping for 100 years following on from the events of Origins. Polycus, though the source of the world, is also unintentionally responsible for creating the evil of the lands every time he has a nightmare. These nightmares have been steadily growing over the last century, and have now begun capturing teensies, leaving it up to Rayman to save the day. While that does sound rather compelling, what it actually amounts to is chasing down 5 identical copies of the Magician through various mythological locations. The locations have absolutely nothing to do with Rayman's world, nor the plot itself, and it's probably best not to overthink it at this stage. Rayman goes to each world, knocks the discount magicians into orbit, and you get a big fat pat on the back as the game unceremoniously ends. It's clear by now that storytelling isn't the strong point of this series, and Legends has to be the worst of the bunch. It feels like a complete afterthought, and there doesn't seem to be any cut content that would hint to the story being butchered the way Origins was, so I guess this was intentional. My main takeaway from this is that it seems like a missed opportunity not to use those scrapped ideas from Origins to flesh out the lore, even if it's in some small way. But regardless, Legends began life as a launch title for the Wii U, but after multiple delays it found itself releasing on just about everything under the sun. With the Wii U having such a weird design in the form of its Fisher-Price tablet of a controller, that naturally meant that unnecessary gimmicks weren't far away. Those gimmicks come in the form of Murphy, who will aid you in your quest from time to time. He's able to distract enemies, move platforms, block lasers, and eat through blockades of cake to form new pathways. It's clear these ideas were designed with the Wii U's touchscreen in mind, but I think they translated the actions well to more traditional control inputs. On Xbox, every one of Murphy's actions are handled with a single button, keeping the simplicity of the control scheme. I was surprised to find out how much I like Murphy's mechanics. They add some much needed variety to the gameplay and are used sparingly enough that they don't become as stale as a Candy Chateau cakewalk. My only gripe with Murphy is that you have no control over which platform he moves, so when there's more than one next to each other he can occasionally move the wrong one, resulting in a death. Other than that, the controls are largely the same. Everything that was great about Origins returns, just with an extra level of polish. Rayman's fist charges quicker, he now carries momentum when attacking in the air, and his jumps are less floaty, just to name a few changes. I didn't think it was possible to improve on perfection, but lo and behold they've done it. Visually speaking, Legends is another downright fantastic looking game. It shares its art style with Origins, however this time round it's less cartoony, with more emphasis on lighting which is used to great effect. Worlds such as 20,000 Lums Under the Sea showcase this exceptionally well, and even play with it as a gameplay mechanic. The themings of the worlds have more variety, still not as mystical as they could be, but at least there's some different ideas, from exploring an ancient Greek maze to infiltrating the City of Rapture. All of the characters are equally as expressive, and overall I'd say the changes they've made make total sense. However, this is where the second controversial statement of the video takes place. I still prefer Rayman Origins art style over Legends. The issues I had with Origins were based around the environments not feeling like they reached their full potential in terms of colour, and that issue persists here somewhat as well. It's definitely seen some improvements, but with the newly added 3D models looking out of place and the characters blending more into the backdrop because the outlines have been removed, Legends' art style just doesn't feel as striking. Having said that though, I think what works in this game's favour is that you never spend too much time in one environment. Origins began to feel too samey because the second half of the game looked identical to the first, but that's not the case here. Much like Origins, Legends has 5 full worlds, but on top of that you also unlock some bonus levels with entirely different aesthetics, and this is where Legends' brilliance really begins to shine. On the surface, Rayman Legends gameplay is identical to its predecessor. It's the same engine, the same collecting cages and lums, the same moveset. Yet the mileage this game gets out of its mechanics is truly fantastic. Legends is less about strict navigation of tiny platforms over pits and more about fast-paced fluid motions. The whole game is set up like a beautifully choreographed dance, chaining each of Rayman's moves together in dynamically interesting ways. You'll pull off maneuvers that combine wall jumps and spring pads straight into zip lines, while Rayman's previously unlockable powers see much more utility, and you'll do all of that as the level bows to your majesty. Everything here has a purpose, and that purpose is to make the player feel like a true hero, an oncoming storm of chaotic energy tearing across the landscape. We sure have come a long way from the first half of Rayman 1. Secrets are hidden well enough to give you satisfaction, but aren't too difficult that you'll need to inch your way through every level, while trails of lums advise the player on how to approach the obstacle ahead. Enemies aren't really a threat to you, and they're not meant to be. They're designed to be slapped aside like an airport official as you make your way to business class. Everything Legends introduces, from its mechanics to its level design, manages to feel instantly familiar and wholly fresh at the same time, and I think it's something you have to play for yourself to really appreciate. People will probably be expecting me to talk about the music levels, stages with remixed songs that have you timing your jumps and attacks to the beat. I don't have all that much to say about them in all honesty. You know the good, I know the good, but I think I preferred the chase sequences from Origins more. However, these are certainly no substitute. I was far more impressed with the changes made to the speed challenges, now rebranded as invasions. It's the same premise as before, get to the end as fast as you can, but now assets from other worlds will show up, meaning you'll be taking a completely different approach to reaching the finish. These are difficult but fun-filled adrenaline shots of goodness, and it's a simple way to add extra content, but by God if it isn't an effective one. It's at this point I'd like you to think back to those bonus levels I previously mentioned. On top of a decently lengthy game stocked full of high caliber content, Legends throws in some stages from Origins as well. We're not talking 10 nor 20 levels, but 40 stages were brought back in their entirety. That's over 2/3 of Origins content returning, and suddenly it all makes sense. Everything that bothered me about Origins has been addressed here. Where Origins' second half felt like it needed a change of pace, Legends delivers. In the new levels, momentum carried more freely so that new mechanics could take centre stage, but by comparison, Origins levels are more in line with a grassroots platforming experience. It doesn't feel jarring because the gameplay styles are still similar enough, and the levels themselves have seen tweaks to their design so that they're less cluttered. Sure, you do lose some of the difficulty, which isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, but overall this decision helps to keep the gameplay fresh. Put simply, adding Origins levels into the mix is less like padding and more like when you return to Kanto in Pokemon Gold and Silver. But despite all the praise I've given Legends, for years I've always seen it as inferior to Origins, yet out of the two games it's the one I come back to time after time. It wasn't until I actually had to sit down and analyse Legends more critically was I able to put my finger on the problem. My only real criticism of Legends is that there's a lot of unnecessary junk tacked onto it. Most of it's inoffensive, Kung Fu is fine and the creature system is largely pointless, but at least it can be ignored. The scratch card system annoys the hell out of me though. Just use the control sticks to scratch away and reveal your prize. Congratulations, you win! In fact, you are guaranteed to win every single time. So buckle up for the long haul as you've got over 120 of these bad boys to get through. It's a redundantly convoluted way of rewarding you, made more irritating as it can't be sidestepped due to this being how you unlock Origins levels. Silver lining is that we've found the trademark Wii U bullshit, and I can now sleep soundly knowing everything in the world is as it should be. But in all fairness, those are just minor issues, a personal gripe more than anything. No, the actual worst part of Rayman Legends is trying to 100% complete it. You've likely had a wonderful time partaking in all the delights this game has to offer. You've been enthralled with the gameplay, amazed by the art style, and motivated by the challenge. But now it's come to a satisfying conclusion and you can put the game back on the shelf with a feeling of total complacency. Yet as you take one last walk through the gallery of heroes, you notice a number of skins have yet to be unlocked. Surely this can't be right. You did everything on offer, amassed hundreds of thousands of lums, yet the final skin needs a colossal 1 million lums to unlock. This is where the grind begins. From this point on, the best way to earn lums is to take part in daily and weekly challenges, which mostly consist of time trials or endless runner game modes. How well you do earns you a trophy ranging from bronze to diamond quality and nets you a healthy few thousand lums a day. So, do some challenges for a week and grind out the rest in single player, I hear you say. And yes, that's a good idea, but what about your awesome rank? For the blissfully unaware, your awesome rank is another completely needless addition to the game that levels up as you collect trophies. There are 11 stages to the ranking system, and if you do everything in the game, you'll easily complete 10 of them. But that final rank requires a ridiculous amount of XP, and the only way to earn it is from those damn daily challenges. So, with a finite number of challenges you can complete per day and no way of boosting it in single player, the absolute quickest it can be achieved is in 2.5 weeks. Oh, okay, that's not so bad. Except it's so much worse than that. Your trophy placement isn't predetermined like the Invasion times are, and since these are leaderboards against real players, your trophy is based on what percentage of the board you land in. Cutting a long story short, that 2.5 week estimate would mean you've got to be in roughly the top 5% of the player base for every single challenge. With rampant cheating and people that are genuinely experts at the game, that seems pretty unlikely. Therefore, the next best scenario sees you getting a gold cup for each challenge, which will take you a whopping 3 months of your life. 3 damn months. Just so we're clear, that's 2 challenges plus 2 weekly challenges every day for the next 90 days. And that's still somewhat wishful thinking, I might add. Call me crazy, but for a game that's largely a single player experience, this just feels like overkill. When I look back at Legends, it's always tainted with this one issue. There's not the satisfaction of 100% in the game. You work so hard only to realise you've essentially made it to the base camp at Everest and the real climb is yet to come. If you're okay with leaving a game unfinished, this won't bother you, but in my eyes, this sort of thing only serves to artificially pad out the length and little more. As an optional mode, it's a great addition. As a necessity for 100%, it's scummy. It's still not Crash 4 levels of scummy, I might add, but it's still a solid A rank on the tier list for sure. So with all that said and done, Rayman Origins and Rayman Legends, are they actually any good? Origins is a game that calls back to the PS1 classic and reimagines that title in a modern light. The decision to open up Rayman's moveset to include parkour elements was a stroke of genius and its implementation was well executed. The levels aren't afraid to challenge you, and the experience feels distinct from everything else on the market. Legends simply takes the best qualities of the Origins formula and pushes them to their natural conclusion, while not wasting a moment to impress. Overall, Legends and Origins are 2 exceptionally good games that are easy to recommend. Yes, they have their flaws, but their fluid, responsive controls, invigorating mechanics, and timeless art styles mean that these games are easily some of the best platformers ever made. If this is the last we see of Rayman in a starring role, then it was an exceptionally strong high to end on. If it isn't, then the next game has got some big shoes to fill. If you've made it this far, please consider supporting the channel in all the usual ways. Thank you for watching, if indeed you still are. Ta-ra!